Now, quite a lot of the time, those comparisons are used for little social media cheerleading, point scoring, particularly around GDP. But I do actually detect a real hunger for more and better understanding about the way in which the economies perform on the different parts of this island. The primary focus there is around the headline economic output figures, with perhaps less emphasis on labour markets. But perhaps the markets would actually give us a better understanding of what's going on in a comparative sense, given all the complexities and difficulties with headline output figures. And to have that understanding, we need to know more about what exactly is being measured and how that's being expressed. So our speakers are John Colgan, NISRA, where he's head of economic and labour market stats for the moment. First, John Mullane, statistician in the labour market and earnings division of CSO. John, thank you.
So thank you very much for having me, and thanks to NISRA as well for setting up this conference. So I have kind of a relatively short presentation just on the general labour market statistics that we produce in the CSO, primarily looking at the survey data and kind of taking the labour force survey example in this presentation, and then the other administrative data sources that we use, and kind of linking them together and the different policy questions that can be looked at by using these different sources. And then hopefully later on in the broader discussion, we can discuss how maybe North and South are different in those ways. So first, the labour force survey. So this is the, I suppose, the official measure of employment, unemployment, etc. The largest labour market survey. It kind of, since it adheres to international definitions like the ILO definitions, International Labour Organization definitions, it is internationally comparable. So across all EU member states, they would all have the same methodology for labour force survey for employment, unemployment, etc. In the LFS now as well, there is some linkage to administrative data sources. So I think if the NA sector is missing on the survey, then that can be added from the revenue payments file, but they are small numbers at the moment. So here we have the headline statistics: persons in employment up in the last quarter, the last published quarter, Q4 2022, the hours per week up, and then the different age kind of breakdowns there as well. And the next labour force survey is being published tomorrow. I assume some of you are aware, but it is the publication date is tomorrow, and there will be a press conference along with that. So some of the concepts and data. So it is a mixed mode collection, primarily face-to-face interviews at the start and follow phone interviews. And as I mentioned, it does facilitate international comparisons. It has the ILO definition of employment. So how this might differ from administrative sources is if someone was on sick leave or if they're on maternity leave, they're expecting to return to work, they would still be classified as employed by the ILO criteria. And similar for unemployed, and then of course the inactive population at the end. I should just mention as well, the RMF as well with the labour force survey does contain some earnings variables from now onwards. So we'll have some linkage as well to PMOD, the PAYE modernisation data flow. So that might be of interest to researchers here. So then looking at the administrative sources in CSO, so there's a relatively new frontier series, the monthly estimates of payroll employees. So just to get an employee count based on revenue data, the general breakdowns of kind of age, sex, and age sector at the moment. And keep in mind as well, kind of for reference to the LFS, that the definitions are different because the way the revenue file is set up is not meant for labour market analysis, and then it can't adhere to physical employment status or ILO definitions. So there's the headline series for the monthly estimates of payroll employees and the general upward trend. And there is, you can see there, since it is monthly, the November 2021, if you remember in the Republic, there was a lockdown. So that little dip there is captured in the revenue file, which wasn't captured in the labour force survey. So there's some advantages to using administrative data that wouldn't be possible with survey. So again, just another quick slide with some of the results from the payroll series. So the annual change based on different age categories. And here it's kind of this slide kind of is in the background most of the monthly estimates payroll employees, which just highlights the differences between the methodology and the kind of data collection component of the labour force survey versus the PAYE modernisation data flow. So some things of interest would be obviously the quarterly and monthly, as I mentioned. So those resident in the state as well is kind of a difference which is important to know. So if you're on the payroll series or the payroll file, you would be, if you got any payments within the state and you're tax liable in the state, you'd be captured as an employee in that series, while in the LFS interview process, you have to be resident in the state for the previous 12 months, with the intention there for staying at least 1 year. So as well, just to compare, kind of when we're looking at administrative data sources versus survey, this is the headline series, more historical one of just looking at the employees from the revenue file and the LFS, and broadly follow the same trend for the headline series, and then you will see kind of narrowing of the gap around the COVID period. So that was persons who were maybe on the pandemic unemployment payment, they were expecting to return to work, they wouldn't have been caught in the payroll series because they would be caught then in the LFS. So I get some more administrative data sources as well, which kind of complement those using the survey. So this was a report done last year, kind of looking at the impact of COVID-19 on business and the labour market. So we looked at the impact of the support scheme, so the temporary wage support scheme and the employment wage support scheme, as well as those who were receiving the pandemic unemployment payment, and followed them along in terms of employee flows to see where they went after restrictions ended. So, and we looked at it as well in terms of the enterprise level as well as the employee level. So you can see kind of on the left of the infographic, the enterprises that availed of state support were at a higher proportion where they had more employees than those enterprises that didn't after the restrictions ended. And those on the kind of employee-based kind of support, we have the pandemic unemployment payment. There was less persons proportionally staying in the same job than those who received the ones where they were tied to the employer, like the wage support schemes. And in general, they were less likely to be found on PMOD in revenue paid employment. So there, it's about 80% still on PMOD, while the wage support schemes were closer to 90%. So using administrative data here, we can kind of integrate several data sources. So we have the revenue payment file, the wage support scheme data, the pandemic unemployment data, and the live register as well. It's kind of the job seekers benefit in the Republic that was tied to as well. So we could follow people from the revenue files, if they left, were they on other administrative data sources, kind of seeing what the general trends were there. But again, it's important to mention that it doesn't align with the ILO definitions of employment. So as well, one of the official measures of earnings does use administrative data. So this is the long-term official measure of earnings in the state. So this is the EAADS. I won't go through them all there, but they're just kind of taken from the headline statistic or the headline publication, the key findings would say. So we get the median weekly earnings as well using revenue payroll data, and kind of there's a bit of linkage there as well. If you see further down, it does look at the wage support payments and what the kind of relevant factors were there in terms of earnings. So to kind of move on to the upcoming ones, and I suppose utilizing the power of administrative data and kind of the existing kind of primary data sources we have in terms of survey. So there's the project being prioritized at the moment is the monthly earning estimates. So that's the tie-in with the headline payroll series. And as well, since it's frontier and kind of the methodology is under review, they're kind of connected together where we'll have earnings and the payroll kind of headline series together, taking in the kind of methodology learnings we have from that. Another thing of note is the job churn, so that's kind of similar idea to the impact of COVID-19 on business and the labour market. So essentially following employees, was their jobs created, destroyed, kind of a job churn rate. So that's the kind of utilising the administrative data there. So that's another kind of upcoming release we have, and a new income distribution analysis. And further developments then, again, kind of tying into what I've talked about previously. As we might be aware, the census was carried out last year around April time, I think April 2022. So there will be a linkage to that, which will give a much broader kind of analysis at the individual level of, let's say, county and other things, regions, etc. So there'll be a linkage there. The timeliness of the EAADS, so I think the previous slide I showed was 2021. So the plan is to have the 2022 at a faster turnaround this time, as with kind of new resources in the division as well. And the creation of the PMOD research microdata file, so the RMF, kind of 10% sample longitudinal data set as well for researchers to kind of use the power of administrative data and get different findings, and the job discrepancy web scraping project. So again, emerging themes kind of from a policy perspective or from what feedback from users, etc. So more real-time data, that's what the administrative data sources can provide. Get more of that, produce more statistics, more relevant things from a policy perspective. See, hours paid and worked is a data gap. Currently, it's not on the revenue data file, so that's worth kind of keeping in mind. Geographical data as well, there's no kind of continuous administrative source of geographical data that's currently used, but there is kind of a gap there. The skill shortages as well, kind of been getting kind of media attention and stuff like that. So there's kind of a demand there from users to identify skill shortages, certain sectors. And that kind of links in with the real-time aspect of it to get it real-time as possible. And minority groups as well. That's from users trying to get more information about minority groups and their labour market characteristics. So thank you very much. It's quite short. Thanks, Amelia.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to follow John, do something very similar, just try and give an overview of our labour market statistics that we produce on a regular basis, so you can hopefully get to see a sense of where we're different, where we're sort of the same. So to start off with, I mean, I'm going to look at the same sort of areas. We call them different things. That's the one thing you will notice, that there are different terms for probably very similar things. So I just cover off a bit about our own labour force survey, our own claimant count, which is what the live register is in the south, and some information around redundancies, our own quarterly employment survey, our PAYE earnings and employment, as well as our annual survey of our hours and earnings. Okay, do a wee bit of PR as well, just to highlight some of the information that's available to us as well. But I suppose it's always good to start with positive. Our labour market has been robust in the face of everything that's been going on in recent times. Maybe starting to see a few changes happening over recent months, but that time will tell on that. But this slide just sort of shows this is our monthly labour market report. Came out last Tuesday. These are the main sort of headline items that then come out on it. So employment rate, economic activity, unemployment, the claimant count, the RTI, the pay as you earn, RTI employment and earnings, and the redundancies information. So we start with the labour force survey. So the labour force survey has been running in Northern Ireland since 1984 on an annual basis, then on a quarterly basis from about 94, 95, and then from about 1998 it's been on a monthly basis since then. So the data runs back quite. And what we produce on a monthly basis comes out of our rolling monthly labour market series. So that's a rolling quarterly series. The sample size is about 3,900 roughly per quarter, and this latest response rate was just over 68%, which is back to pre-pandemic levels, which has been a big achievement given some of the pressures that the survey has been under during the pandemic. We have a mixed mode data collection, very similar to the south. You know, we have face-to-face interviews at the start, telephone interviews, we do a knock to nudge to go out and encourage response as well, which has been a big actually success, and it's getting the response rate back up. And in our monthly report, it contains that information I mentioned earlier on, and then on a quarterly basis, we also include the QES, which is the quarterly employment survey, which gives us an employee job series. So just to show you the slight differences that we have with John's sort of ILO definitions. So for us, it's 16 and over compared to 15 and over in the south. But basically, other than that, they're exactly the same, okay, in terms of those definitions. And just in terms of latest results, I mean, same thing, we're still showing very, very low unemployment rate. It's at the lowest levels it's been, you know, for years as it sits at the minute. Employment rate is at high levels again. And we've seen the economic activity rate crept up over the pandemic, but it started to fall again. Lowest levels 25, just over 25%. So we're not far away from that as it sits at the minute. Interesting bit is about hours worked. Hours worked, given the pandemic and furlough and everything that was going on, was a stat that sort of showed a lot of sort of change in the labour market. And you'll see the big drop there as a result of the pandemic. But the interesting bit has been how long it has taken it to get back up to pre-pandemic levels. So it's only sort of got there now, which has been an interesting just outworking from the pandemic in terms of how people's attitudes to work and the work that has been done. So claimant count similar to the live register. That's basically job seekers allowance and universal credit claimants who are claiming primarily for the reason of being unemployed. Okay, it's an experimental statistic at the minute because there's still work ongoing by DWP to improve the quality of the information that's coming from the universal credit system. So in April, just past there, the count was at 37,500, which is it's still significantly higher than what it was pre-pandemic. So that's still a challenge in that space. That's the one statistic starting to show a bit of movement in the current economic climate. Redundancies is another important statistic because we find this is a great predictor in terms of when things are starting to go as well. So we receive, companies must inform the Department for the Economy. We do the work on their behalf whenever there's impending redundancies of 20 or more people. So we have two statistics that come out. So we have the proposed redundancies, which is the initial figure, and then there's the confirmed redundancies, which is the actual jobs lost. And so the latest figures show that there were 70 redundancies occurred in April, taking the total up to over 1,000. So now the big change in that, and I'll show you in this next slide, is that it's actually more than double what it was this time last year. So it's starting to move again as well. And you'll see just on that graph, it's not perfect, but you'll see where the dips were is where we start economic output and everything else starts to slow. And you see the effect of the pandemic there obviously as well. It's starting to level off now, you'll see at the end of this series. And the expectation is that might start to move up again, okay? So our quarterly employment survey. So this is a short-term employee jobs estimates for NI, which are obviously used by ONS for them to be able to produce their workforce jobs series. The QS sample size was 6,000. Its response rate's around about 69% as well at the minute, so it's not quite back up to pre-pandemic levels, but it's getting there. And the latest estimates show the number of jobs at 810,000. That has been a success. You'll see in this next graph how that has been another continued success over the last while. The trend has just still been on that general upward trend. The reason I show that is because the next slide then has our pay-as-you-earn RTI information, and you'll see that the numbers of employees who receive pay through HMRC, 785,000. The QES was showing 820,000. So the difference there is obviously one's jobs, this is people. And obviously the quarterly employment survey is a sample, so the sample are in there as well. That's the main difference between the two sets of figures. The other thing just to be aware about the HMRC data is it's been a fantastic process to get access to it. It's been a big change, a big massive change for what we're able to do now on a monthly basis, because you're able to get data right up. It's still experimental, which means it's still prone to large revisions. And that's the biggest, especially in the most recent months. And you'll have seen what happened in April there for our own figures in terms of there's a big upward increase. And that was as a result of the pay deal for the NHS staff. Okay, now that got revised back down again this month. So there are still issues in terms of actually being able to deal with the data, but the fact is it's the quality of the data and the size of the data set is just huge. Unfortunately, we don't have access to the microdata yet. We just get the results. Okay, so we haven't got that stage yet. So that's the one thing that we're missing out on. Now, when we didn't have that, our Rolls Royce was always the annual survey of hours and earnings. Okay, and it still is. So it's a really important data set. So I mean, in terms of structural statistics, it is the main measure. So it measures the average level of distribution of earnings and paid hours for employee jobs. So it helps, you know, and it's broken down obviously by gender, occupation, industry, region. You get part-time, full-time. It's a fantastic series of data, and it's utilised hugely. It's a 1% sample of the previous PAYE earnings on an annual basis, but the response rate is in the 90s. So it's a very detailed output. And you'll see a couple of points I just want to raise again, just to show for April 22. So median gross weekly earnings increased a couple of percent, nothing in, but the real increase just shows you as a decrease of 4.5% over the year in that space. So the big fall, big effect on earnings, cost of living is happening for us at the minute. Again, just to promote the same idea, just the economy seems to be still, our labour market says this is just the dashboard that we have on our website. It's for people to, if they want access to it and play around with it. Lots of information there, but again, the labour market still seems to be keeping fairly robust. But we are seeing sort of signs of weaknesses just at the edges as it goes at the minute. And then a couple of things, just a few links and things which obviously you get slide packs when they come out afterwards, just in some of the information that we have available. One of the things I did want to mention that I haven't got on the slide is that when we're talking about comparing North and South statistics, it just dawned on me today that 20 years ago I started involved in a project, some of you might remember, the CSO and NISRA collaborated on a publication called Ireland North and South Statistical Profile. Okay, where we went through, I think we spent 18 months going through trying to bring the data together and the difficulty of bringing the data together. But we did end up with a number of chapters, including the labour market, but there were challenges within it, but it's not something that's not achievable. It ran for a few years. The last report was a comparison of the 2011 censuses North and South. And then that was it. It never got really taken up after that, because it just wasn't, at that stage, it just wasn't the user asked or need for it. But it is possible. I think that's the thing with it. We do collaborate with our colleagues in the South on a regular basis. We work with trade asymmetries. We work with them all the time, and we're looking at IT, transformation projects, and everything else that's going on. So, you know, it is one of those areas that seems strange, but we do collaborate on a regular basis. It just doesn't seem to be in this space. That's me.
Thank you. So we're operating with one roving mic and 3 people and 1 mic up here. So the way we'll try and work it, I think, is probably